tricky work because usually you have to work with government, and innovating within government is extremely difficult, right? It's like designed to be uninnovatable. That's not a word, but it is now. And so anyways, that's kind of like the background of what I do. Now, my office has a separate mission from these other two, which is what I want to highlight here for a second. And that is that it's my job to try and help my students get to a point where they will be successful professionally, right? So the students who come and like actually work with my office, they go on and they do good things. Now in terms of like just grad school, here's my list. These are just a few of the places they've gone to, right? Duke Law School and Columbia's School of Public Affairs, University of Texas Law School, Georgetown Law School, University of Michigan Law School, the Harvard Kennedy School, University College London, London School of Economics, School of Environmental and Public Affairs at Indiana. These are all the sort of places that I try and take students, you know, and help them get into. Now, how do they get there? This is as the first guy to graduate from here and then go to Harvard, I discovered something very interesting along that path, which was that I had a couple of professors who encouraged me to do a number of things as a student, right? Get involved in this, do that, and then I kind of took off from there and I started a nonprofit and I did this and I did that. And it turns out that purely by accident, I did what you're supposed to do to get into a good graduate program. And then I got to Harvard and I realized that everybody there, their schools teach them how to do this intentionally, right? So they all come from little liberal arts colleges like Westminster up in Salt Lake or Grinnell in Iowa or Williams College in Massachusetts. They go to these places where they are trained that what you have to do is you're a full-time student and you go and you do all this extracurricular stuff and then it looks really good when you're applying to law school or medical school or whatever. And by the time you get done, after having done all those things, you are a superstar who can be accepted into an Ivy League college, right? Like that's the formula that they teach. It's also much easier, I will point out, for a Westminster student because unlike the average UVU student, or back in my day, UVSC student, most of those students don't have a spouse, a mortgage, a job, kids, right? The sort of things that most UVU students have, right? So the world is bent to basically create a disadvantage for you. So for me, it is a crime to teach a class that does not have as an end result that when you get done with the class, just as part of doing the class, you have things that you can add to your resume. Because just the diploma is not going to get you very far. I hate to tell you that, especially anybody in liberal arts, right? History, philosophy, political science, you guys, right? The history and political science factories were shut down sometime in the 1950s. They no longer operate. That's a joke. There's no such thing as a history factory, okay? The point being, right, that in order for your degree to have value, it has to have this whole resume piece. And it's this thing that we talk about at UVU, but we don't do nearly enough. So when you get done with this class, I want you to have multiple things that you can actually list on your resume when you apply to jobs, or list on your application when you apply to grad school, that you just did as a part of doing this course, and you didn't have to go and carve separate time out of your life, out of your busy schedule, away from your family or away from your job or whatever else, right? So I'm trying to help you build something that will be a value added to your degree. This is really, really important to me because it annoys me that we do not emphasize it enough at UVU, and so many faculty do not really care, right? Now, I'm just going to be perfectly honest. Most faculty have a PhD. The only job track that they understand is getting a PhD and teaching at a university. So they don't really think in terms of like, what do they have to do to help you get a job somewhere else? I'm trying to help you in terms of making your degree valuable for anything else, or a PhD if you want it, right? Okay. Shameless plug for my course, by the way. So If you actually enjoy this stuff, I am teaching a course this summer on it. And so what I do is I do all kinds of projects like this. We'll be doing a project for Park City, a research project for them. And this class is basically credit for sort of doing some of the research piece. It doesn't have, you know, traditional assignments. And like the Park City job, for example, we get a contract from them. And one of the nice things about it is the other aspect of what I try to do is be able to pay students to do things that I think will help them build their resume. So this Park City contract should pay about $18 an hour for research during the summer. And we'll have other contracts. We do research all the time. Anyway. All right, so again, I've displayed this before, but laws are like sausages. It is better not to see them being made because they're kind of unappetizing. But what we want you to be able to do is through this project, through C-School, you will be helping a couple of cities to hopefully make policies, make laws, make changes in an intelligent way that will serve the community and better the community. And the fact that that's rooted in history may seem odd to you, but it makes perfect sense to me, right? And if you don't believe me, I just need you to trust me that the fact that we're doing this as part of a history course is the two are intrinsically linked. I cannot separate creating good things that will help people in the future from an understanding of the past and how the world works, which is what you should get from studying history. All right, that is the end of my rant. Okay. That was great, by the way, Matt. You did just an amazing job. Okay, any other questions? I dealt with some, there were a number of questions that I was really confused by that I didn't know how to answer. If you think you asked one and it wasn't in there that I didn't address, like some people, like I would ask, do you have a question about this? And they would answer yes. I'd be like, okay. So that doesn't help me. So if you're one of those, right, like hopefully you have it, but we'll just take like a few more questions. Yeah.
Just wondering what the points that C-School participating in C-School were.
Altogether, if you do C-School as the competition, it's 50. If you're in the research pool, it's 80. And
150, not just 50.
Wait, what?
Wasn't it like 150?
If they do the online training, show up.
Yeah, that's 150. What did I say?
You said 50.
Oh, sorry, 150. I was up really late last night. Yes. Yeah.
So with the online stuff at C-School, do you have to do that to be able to go to the thing today?
You do, but I would say, you know, at this point, if you haven't done it, I would just go do it in reverse order. It might be slightly confusing. But go to the training today, then do the online thing, if that's where you're at, okay? So I just go ahead and go. Yes?
So, the 1,200 points total, so is that all of the guilds added together? Because like on Canvas, I see just like the 4 agitators and the indexing one, that clearly is not going to have 1,200. So I'm just wondering like...
Right, so you did a midterm.
Yeah.
Okay, you have a written assignment, you have an indexing assignment, you have 4 guild assignments that add up to 150 points, you have C-School, right? You go and add all that stuff up, if you actually like add, I'm not just talking about, presumably you're going to take the final exam, right? So you just add in those points, right? The one area, like one of the areas that I'm not sure about is in terms of like the quizzes, the in-class quizzes, whether or not we're actually going to get there. If we don't, for example, in that case, then we'll just throw those points out, right? And so the total amount you need to get, say, an A goes down by X amount of points, right? And that's kind of what I'm talking about. My number one advice to you, if you are panicky at this point, is take a deep breath. I am honestly very kind when it comes to grading. Just do your best, right? And you will be fine. And again, I will not punish you. If we were behind on things and we don't quite have enough runway to do everything that we hope to do this semester, then we will make adjustments. But we'll have that conversation in a couple of weeks. Okay.
I'm not seeing that writing assignment that you're talking about, that one assignment that's worth lots of.
So the explanation for it will go up today or tomorrow morning. Okay? And that's kind of what I was talking about. It should be fairly straightforward as a writing assignment, but it's worth a lot of points. Yeah?
So I actually just had a question about the extra sci-fi indexing stuff that we like could sign up for.
Yes?
It's probably for Matt. How do we know?
Okay, so yeah, I was going to mention that today in class, so I'm glad you brought it up. So we have that, there's an announcement on Canvas that has a sign-up sheet for those extra guild points, and I'm going to take those and I'm going to add your names to the list of assignments this afternoon. So if anyone hasn't put in, is that a good time? Like,
Yeah.
Okay, so if anyone hasn't put their name on that list for extra guild points, add your name today, and I'll try to put that up today, let's say around 3. So if you get it in before 3,
Well, if you want to put it up at, you're going to start putting it up at 3 or be done at 3?
Yeah, so I'll start putting it up at 3.
Okay.
So I'll add all the names that I have at 3 to that list. So add your name to that, find the announcement on Canvas, and fill out that survey if you want those extra points. And then 3 o'clock is the cutoff time, and you should see those names on the... I can post an announcement when I'm done with it. So I'll post an announcement with the link to the spreadsheet, and you'll see your name on there when I'm done.
And then one more, is there a due date for that assignment, or is it just?
It's with everything else at the end, so there's kind of like the final catch-all deadline, which is April 27th.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. With that, let's dive into the next thing. Yeah.
So where is this place you add our names to the list?
Where's it at, Matt?
It's an announcement on Canvas. Let me find it and see what it's called.
Could you add it to the home page so that people don't have to dig through announcements?
Yep, yeah, I'll add it to the home page right now.
Okay.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So I know there's confusion about like the due date. So to get the, obviously we want the most points as possible. So
Right.
are they due the 20th, or do we have to submit all of it on tomorrow to get the maximum points?
Which points are you talking about?
So the guild assignments, they're apparently due tomorrow, but they're available to the 20th.
You'll have more time.
Okay, they go down by point.
No, you'll have more time. I'm flipping the override switch. I just haven't figured out what it is yet. Okay. Yeah.
If we do the other guild assignments, like, do we get more credit? Like, can we get more points?
If you do, sorry.
If we did like the agitators or the futurist assignment, can we get more points?
So you want to like go over and do other guild assignments?
I don't necessarily understand the guild, so.
Yeah. I would say no. Just stick to the assignments within your guild, okay? That they'll be they're all around a particular theme and idea. And maybe that's worth knowing. Okay, so the guilds exist. Again, I explained this a few times at the beginning of the semester, but the guilds exist for the sake of, I cover broadly American history. This allows you, each of the 3 groups, you get to do a little bit more in-depth within a particular area of history because it's just so hard to cover everything, right? So we're trying to give a little more detail to a particular chunk of history for each group. Last question.
Okay, I was just wondering if you can add an announcement for that Thursday series thing so we can see this.
Yep, absolutely. I'll probably just add this PowerPoint because it's got various things in it. Okay, America and the world, 2. I want to talk about I want to talk about competing ideologies, as I mentioned before. We're not going to get all the way through this. By the way, I believe it's like this Thursday. I need to go back and check. It's either this Thursday or next Thursday, but I believe it's this Thursday. We're going to have an actual, this is something I can't do with most of the previous conflicts that we've had, but we happen to have a handful of people left who fought in World War II. And so I'm going to actually have one here. So rather than me blab on and try and fill in the details for people who are now long dead, we're going to bring in a World War II veteran to actually talk about World War II. Okay? So between sort of the assignment that I gave last time to kind of put you in the minds of Germans at the time, and what I'm going to talk about today, and probably again part of the time next time, looking at the clock, this will kind of give background and kind of the background pieces of it. But in terms of the war itself and the war experience, I'm really going to rely on our guests to kind of fill in those details for us, okay? But I want to talk about, it's necessary for us to understand these competing ideologies, sort of political theories and economic theories and ideas about how the world should be run, what's the right way to run and organize a country. Because if we don't understand them, then a lot of World War II and especially the Cold War are not going to make sense, right? So that's what I want to do today. All right, so as a very brief summary of what we covered early on, America comes, we are a unique institution, we're a unique country, an invented country, right? That kind of goes and says, let's take the best of what we understand about everything that's been said before us by the ancient Romans, by the ancient Greeks, by people like Machiavelli and Hobbes and John Locke and all these different theorists. Let's pull it together and build what we think is a perfect country, right? And the basic concept for this is what we would call classical liberalism, okay? So the original founding concept of America is classical liberalism. It's an idea that at its foundation sees freedom as the absence of government intrusion, right? So if you kind of go back to that whole state of nature, social contract theory stuff that we did with Hobbes and so forth, right? In the state of nature, we're free, but it's pure chaos and war and terrible and so forth, and so therefore we need government to come in and to provide some order. But the basic fundamental idea for classical liberalism is that we want to keep that government as minimal and small as possible because we want to maximize our freedom. So we bring in government, but it has to be designed really, really well in order to avoid certain things. So for examples of negative, the idea of liberty is illustrated in terms of negative rights. Okay, what we see often in the Bill of Rights. So in the First Amendment it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Okay, so it says, it defines this liberty in terms of Congress cannot do, fill in the blank, right? It creates liberty by saying government does not have the power to do something, okay? We see it again in the 9th Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people, okay? It's that negative language. And then the 10th, the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people, right? So in both of these two amendments, we get the idea that if it's not explicitly, just because the Constitution deals with it, doesn't mean that people don't still have that right. They still have that right. Those rights are retained by the states or by the people. Right? So it's a negative language that views liberty as the absence of government intrusion. All right, so a number of things about it. It assumes rights exist in the absence of government, as I just said, and this is kind of rooted in the state of nature and social contract theory that we talked about earlier. That rights inhere in the individual, right? That they're in the individual human being. And this is very much an Enlightenment concept where the Enlightenment really focused on the individual, the atomistic, right? Like liberty is in the individual human being, and that concept of rationalism in the individual and so forth. It relies on concepts from the ancient world of virtuous leaders who are pursuing excellence, and that sort of serves as a check against power, right? So we kind of assume that the people who will lead the country will be virtuous. They will be good. They will be dedicated to serving their country and all that sort of thing. It distrusts popular rule, right? So democracy is not really something that classical liberalism is real big on, other than at like the local level. Perfectly good with it at the local level, but as something to organize a large nation, they're terrified of it. They believed instead that government structures, the way that you structure the institutions of government, could check against power and power grabs and corruption. And that there were basically varying levels of skepticism about the national government. And that's kind of where we got into that Jeffersonian versus Hamiltonian thing, where Hamilton saw a significant role for the national government and Jefferson didn't, right? So you still have variation within all of this, but it still has this sort of umbrella of ideas that is shared with all of these people. Okay, then we move into a different concept which begins to appear in the later half of the 19th century, especially after the Civil War, where we see amendments that have a different sort of language. So, for instance, the 16th Amendment, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. Okay, so instead of Congress shall not, this says Congress shall have the power, right? So here, later on, we start to see government being empowered. We see, instead of negative rights, the idea of positive rights, that people have a right to something, and that that idea is kind of comes into play. Now that has its roots in a variety of different things, some of them distinctly American, but in the broadest sense, we might talk about it in terms of socialism. Okay, and socialism is a word that, like, we hear it as an American anytime since 1945. You hear the word socialism and bells go off inside of your head, and something dangerous is happening. There's a lot of different types of socialism, and I'm going to kind of walk us through like what socialism was to what it becomes. And so that we have a clear distinction. Socialism has one of its earliest, like, theoretical founders is Thomas Paine, who was a guy who was integral to the American Revolution. He was English, but he wrote a book called Agrarian Justice, in which he talked about the idea of having an extensive property tax, and then the money collected from that property tax would be used to take care of the poor. Okay? So there's this idea of not simply government as limited, but this idea of government could go and do certain things, redistribute certain things in order to create greater equality or greater justice or what have you. There are various other ideas. A lot of early socialism is utopian in nature, meaning that it was kind of this idea of like, we will go and we will live together, and rather than there being like the boss who runs the factory, we will sort of all collectively own the factory. Right? There will be collective ownership, and there were certain utopian societies. This is New Harmony, Indiana, one of the socialist experiment community. It did not last very long, but the idea was, let's come together and sort of have everything shared and work in a very cooperative nature. and have an 8-hour workday and all this sort of thing. It fell apart pretty quickly. But it was one of the first early experiments in this idea of a utopian or like a perfect society, and that's done on a community level. And so today we don't necessarily think of this as socialism, right? I mean, some people may, but this is not what we would today commonly refer to as socialism. A better term for it is something like communitarianism, where the idea is on a small community level, you could maybe create a society that works well, where people are much more cooperative, and so forth. I put communitarianism, one of the best examples of communitarianism is from Mormonism in Utah in the 19th century with the United Order. The United Order system really focused on having these communities where there was this idea of a very communal society with sharing of resources, taking care of the poor, and so forth. But it's not necessarily done by government, right? That's another key factor. It's done on this community level. And the United Order, of all the utopian communitarian examples we can point to, is probably the most successful and the longest lasting that we have from this time period. So this communitarianism is different, right? It's focused on this of creating a sort of cooperative society. In sociology, we call it pro-social norms, meaning that we try and think in terms of, if classical liberalism is focused on the individual and the individual's rights, communitarianism is focused on the individual's duties to the community and serving the community and cooperating with the community. Volunteerism and service and collective sacrifice and all these sorts of things, right, are kind of built into this idea. Back to regular socialism, we get people like Pierre-Joseph, I have no idea how to pronounce his last name correctly, he's French, Proudhon, who these guys, he basically says that the enemy is capitalism, right? The capitalist system is the enemy, and what we need to do is move towards getting rid of money, getting rid of classes, economic classes, and try to create a society that he was actually very anti-government as well, again, kind of consistent with early socialism. And so there are some key aspects. There's a lot of different flavors to socialism, so we're summarizing fairly simply here. We could look to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, we can look to a lot of different people in terms of socialism by itself, but there are a couple of different ideas. Creating cooperative association, business or government, right? People working together, redistribution of resources, property, and or wealth is often a common aspect, right? We're gonna go and redistribute things, tax people, tax the wealthy, feed the poor with that money, that sort of thing. And then economic rights and protections, particularly for the poor or unpropertied, right? So we get these ideas of sort of like, let's focus on protecting these people. A lot of socialism comes out of continental Europe. Now, if you remember, the Americans leave Europe in part because it's so crowded and there's no property available and they lack a lot of things. And they go and sort of pursue one experiment, which is more focused on this sort of classical liberalism. But back in Europe, these problems persist, right? You still have overcrowding. You still have a small, wealthy, aristocratic elite that kind of controls everything and owns everything, and all that sort of thing. And so they come up with a different approach, which is a political philosophy that's much more aimed at, we need to go and fix this, redistribute this. And a lot of this feeds into the French Revolution and the way that the French Revolution plays out, and various other political movements. Okay, then we get to the 1840s, 1848, and a guy named Karl Marx and his buddy Engels. And these two guys come up with a concept called communism. And communism is like socialism, but we're going to go and take it to the next level. And it's actually, if you try and read like the Communist Manifesto, it's a pretty complex concept. Sounds really, really good when you read it. But it has a lot of complexity to it, a lot of interesting aspects. It involves a strong central government authority, usually, right? Now this isn't necessarily in design, but this is in practice. It involves the destruction of capitalism and the capitalist system, taking the means of production. So in communism, we basically see that there's like this parasitic group that we will call capitalists, okay? And these guys just sort of are like parasites that control the means of production and gain all their wealth off of feeding off of the working class, right? That's kind of like the founding idea of communism. And so we take that away from them, we redistribute it, we give it to the working class, and we reorient how we think about the world. Now, we create, first of all, capitalism is replaced with a dictatorship of the proletariat. Proletariat is a word for the working class. And dictatorship is kind of a funny word here because when Marx and Engels write about it, what they're talking about is the idea of, Marx argues that anytime you have a government, it is class warfare. It is a dictatorship. It just happens to be that in most societies, it's the capitalists who are the dictators ruling over the working class. And instead, he wants to go and put the working class as the dictators and the capitalists down on the bottom, right? So that's the idea. It actually involves a lot of direct democracy. It means, again, production is seized from capitalists and held publicly by the state. Everything is publicly owned and everyone is publicly supported, right? So, and the economy, everything is centrally planned. The number of shoes that are going to be produced this year is decided by the government. The number of, the amount of bread that's going to be produced. Everything is decided economically, centrally by the government. And then theoretically, you then have the transition to the socialist paradise without classes or governments. Now, what you'll see with all communist countries is that they never quite make it to this last stage, okay? And there are a variety of reasons for that, but one of the reasons is that this was probably a bad term for Marx and Engels to use. Because what happens is that you have either the People's Republic in China, right, for example, and they become the party of the proletariat, right? They become the party of the working class, and they go, we represent the working class, and we are the dictators, and we control everything, right? So you wind up with a dictatorship that never really actually makes this transition to the socialist paradise.